America's team always brings us a lot of entertainment. The whole contract situation with Micah Parsons, as well as this Dallas Cowboys offense, very reliant on its passing attack with Dak Prescott, CD Lamb, and now George Pickens. All of that and more here as we preview the Dallas Cowboys seasons. Here on Chasing Sports News, we are previewing each of the 32 teams' NFL seasons before things get started. And today we preview the Dallas Cowboys season with a very special guest, their team reporter for The Athletic, Jon Machota. Jon, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm so glad you're able to join us. We appreciate you taking the time, obviously, with your busy schedule. We know, obviously, you're covering the team. You're one of the guys in that environment. It's been a little while now since minicamp ended. Overall, just what stood out to you from Dallas's minicamp?
Yeah, I feel like every year I cover the team, there's less and less that you can get out of OTAs and minicamp just because they can't do as much. And that's because of the collective bargaining agreement. They don't want the players doing as much. The players don't want to be doing as much. They don't want a chance of getting injured that time of year. I mean, heck, just covering the Cowboys, not last year, but the two previous seasons, they lost OTA practices because they got quote unquote too physical in previous OTA practices. So there's not a lot to take away from, especially with a team like the Cowboys. A lot of people want to know what's going on with the run game. It's just tough to take anything away in the run game when you're not hitting, you're not coming close to tackling, you're not in pads. So it's hard to say there's very much there. So the biggest thing for me is just, one is the attendance, and two, where are guys lining up. And so certainly having George Pickens, and the addition they made trading for that Steelers wide receiver has been a big one. He made some nice plays throughout OTAs and minicamp. Certainly the clear, compliment to CD Lamb as a wide receiver. He looks the part. There's no question. When you see him walk by, you're like, yeah, he's all bit of 6'3", whatever, 2, whatever he is. And they got a great 1-2 punch there, and it looked that way, certainly in OTAs and training camp. But in terms of, like I said, the run game, cornerback play, some of their question mark spots, defensive tackle, we probably still won't get that ironed out until we get to training camp in a couple of weeks. But this is Brian Schottenheimer's first training camp as head coach. He had great attendance. That's pretty much all you can ask for.
Look, obviously this team made some changes. They won the NFC East in 2023, but they entered last season contenders with a similar core. They secured last-second extensions with Dak Prescott and CD Lamb. They started off 3-2. They looked fine, but they began to struggle. Then Dak went down with a season-ending injury, and that was pretty much the story of the Cowboys' 2024 season. Do you believe that the season should just be, oh yeah, Dak was injured, or what do you believe contributed to the lackluster 7-10 finish?
No, I think it's bigger than Dak being injured because Dak got hurt. I mean, that's 8 games into the season, and they did not look close to the team they had been the 3 previous years when they were winning 12 games and making the playoffs and that. And so you won't get anybody in the building to admit to this, but I think that there was genuine, it was real hangover from that loss the season before when they lost to the Packers in the playoffs. I think that's the worst loss in Cowboys history when you factor in the players that they had, how healthy they were going into the playoffs, getting a home field advantage, getting the 2 seed. And on top of it, they were the best team in the NFL for 2 years straight playing at home. And then to drop the way they did and play as poorly as they did. It's one thing if they would have just lost that game late and you'd be like, yeah, they choked or whatever. Right. But to just get dismantled like that and play the worst game that they had played all season in a big moment at home, that was a head scratcher. And I don't think anybody really recovered from that. And I think Jerry Jones is hoping, well, they'll use that as kind of motivation. And it never really happened. That team never looked good from even when Dak was healthy early in the year. But certainly, don't get me wrong, the injuries were a big part of it. Your top defensive ends combined to miss 40 games. That's never going to be a good thing. And then, Dak is a big part of it. Maybe they are able to turn around late in the year with him. But when he was lost for the season, that was pretty much your final nail in the coffin for that year. And so they needed to make some kind of change, and they did. I think Brian Schottenheimer being the hire was kind of surprising. But up to this point, everything he's done, I think he's done a great job. Now he just has to obviously carry that over till Sundays.
Now we're talking about these contract situations. They once again enter another one of these historic contract type situations with their star player, Micah Parsons. Just tell us what you know about that complicated situation, how you think it will get resolved, if it will.
Yeah, it's funny because it doesn't seem like it's very far apart. Like, you get some of these contracts, heck, maybe even some of the other ones at the same position in the NFL with like Trey Hendrickson, where you're just like, I don't even know if that thing's that close. It seems like there's some real animosity between the two sides. I really don't get that from the Cowboys, especially when it comes to Micah and Jerry Jones, So they've talked parameters, and doesn't sound like they're very far away, but it's just about hammering out that final deal. Kind of similar to the Dak deal. Cowboys want a longer contract. The player wants a shorter contract so they can get back to free agency quicker, because obviously the money keeps going up every year. And so the Cowboys wanted like a 5 or 6 year deal with Dak, and he wasn't going to move off of 4, and he ended up getting 4. I think it's the same with Parsons. I think the Cowboys would love, heck, they probably want to do more than 6 years with Parsons, but I think he wants to keep it around 4 so he can play 4 years and then get back to free agency, get another big payday. So I don't know if it'll get done right before camp starts, but Micah said he's going to be out there. And I do anticipate him being in California, but I just don't know. He won't be practicing unless that new contract is done. And maybe that's the thing that pushes it over the finish line. But I just think that it's a bad move on both sides if they don't get something done, because with a new coaching staff, it's another new defensive coordinator for Micah Parsons. It's in his best interest to be at all at training camp, and so that they all can hit the ground running week 1.
Last season, obviously, Micah Parsons, 12 sacks in 13 games. There's nothing to be ashamed of there. But just overall, when you look at the advanced analytics and you look at the way he played in his first 2 years in the league, it feels like Micah Parsons hasn't still reached that level. Are you concerned at all about his level of production and maybe why this has been kind of a contract standout, if you will?
Not really with his production. I mean, I will say that I think he's missing that like signature moment late in the season or in the playoffs where he really takes over a game. Because the stats have obviously been there. His stats been good enough where he probably could have at least one NFL Defensive Player of the Year trophy up to this point. He has, and he's finished second a couple times. But the production right now isn't a concern, I don't think. The one I would say about for him and his size, because he is built more like a traditional off-the-ball linebacker than your prototypical like edge rushing, pass rusher. So I do wonder, and there's no way for me to prove this or know this, but I do have my own wonder about what about like later in his career? Like how long will at one point all these hits and everything add up because he's a smaller size guy for that position?
Right.
Maybe not. Some of these guys are just freaks, I mean, I never thought LeBron James would play as long as he has at the level that he has. I mean, he's a physical specimen, and Micah Parsons, obviously he's not built like LeBron James, but he's very, very physically gifted. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you just turn on the tape. So right. I think right now, I don't think there's any concern about his production, but I do think for him to he can still take his game up a notch. And I think when that would really happen is late in the year. That's when he's got to do it. It's got to be a big moment late in the year, playoff, something like that. That's what the great players do.
Right, and it is crazy it doesn't have the Defensive Player of the Year trophy. I think I've picked him to win now in a few years in a row because it feels like you're finally going to get there. But yeah, I mean, Mike is obviously such an incredible player, and you're right, it would be so great for both parties to get that deal done so that they don't need to have that lingering into the season. Look, this offseason, Dallas adds George Pickens, you draft Tyler Booker on the offensive line, but you mentioned it at the beginning of the video, still feels like there's some glaring holes on this roster. What's your overall assessment of Dallas offseason?
Yeah, I would say for me, the biggest areas of concern would be cornerback would be number one, just because two guys you'd like to have in your starting lineup in Trayvon Diggs and Savon Ravel, who they drafted in the 3rd round. Both are coming off major knee injuries. So Ravel could be ready by week 1, but there's no guarantee there. And if he is, like, what level will he be playing at? Will he be ready to be at a starting level NFL player? And with Diggs, it'll probably be a little bit longer. And then when he comes back, will he just hit the ground running, or will it take some time for him to get ramped up on Sundays? So you got Deron Bland, and you feel good about that. And they added Kaiir Elam. I think he'll be a major guy in the mix, but you need another couple good corners there. So I don't think they're done. I think Stephon Gilmore is a free agent out there that would not surprise me if they end up making a move for him, maybe around training camp if they can't, if they don't like what they have or they feel like they need some more veteran presence for early in the season. He's obviously played with the team before. That would be number one for me. Number 2 would be running back. I just thought that they would do more at the position over the last 2 off seasons. They just really haven't done much, free agency or the draft. A few years ago when they had Tony Pollard as the lead guy, if you would have told me that he was going to sign elsewhere and they wouldn't draft a running back in the first 3 rounds or make a notable free agency signing, I would have said you're crazy. The Cowboys, when they've been good, they've had an elite back that you've known who they were, and they don't have that right now. They have a group of guys that could potentially be good, but nobody really knows who that is. Javonte Williams is probably the lead runner right now, but Jaden Blue, who they drafted in the 5th round out of Texas, has got a chance to be that guy as the season goes along. And then they added Miles Sanders. So, I mean, they added some pieces, but there's not that guy there that you look at and you're like, okay,
a lot
well,
of
this is
unknowns in that running back room. Yeah.
right. So that would be 2. And then 3 for me is defensive tackle. And fans get frustrated what they do at defensive tackle, but they don't invest a ton historically. Now, they did give Osa Digizua a big contract this offseason, and then they did use a 1st-round pick on Mozzie Smith, but they haven't really done much outside of that, and defensive tackle is still a big question mark.
I think overall, going back to the rushing attack part, I mean, you're right. This team at one point, it was like, oh my, you have almost not too. You can never have too many running backs, but you have this like two-headed monster running back between Ezekiel Elliott and Tyler and Tony Pollard, excuse me. And now it feels like they're just searching for running backs. Last year, they weren't great in the rushing game, and Warren Sharp is projecting them right now to have the worst rushing attack in football this coming season. So obviously, we'll have to keep an eye on that. A lot of that, though, is predicated on the offensive line. There was a time where this offensive line, I'm sure you know, was one of, if not the best in the National Football League, and now it feels like it's just a shell of what it used to be. They have tried to improve the problem, drafting an offensive lineman in the 1st round in 3 of their last 4 drafts. How do you see the offensive line producing in 2025?
I think it'll be better than it was last year. Obviously, a new offensive line coach who's coming from the college game, so there could be a little bit of growing pains there. But they're going to be young, and they got talent, but it's going to probably, like I said, there's going to be some ups and downs. And it feels a lot like the 2013, 2014 offensive line for the Cowboys, where when I started covering the team in 2011, the first draft I covered was Tyron Smith, and that was the beginning of Jason Garrett taking over, and he was trying to revamp the offensive line. And so they got Tyron in 11, and then in 13, they got Travis Frederick, and then 14, Zach Martin, and it turned everything around to making that offensive line, like, as you mentioned, one of, if not the best for a while in the NFL. And so I think they're trying to do that right now with Tyler Smith and Tyler Booker and Tyler Guyton, and anybody else off the street that's named Tyler probably can get in the mix somewhere. Right. But they're trying to do that, and Guyton didn't have a great rookie year. He'll be the first one to admit that. But I do think he'll be better because of the fact that last year he was making the move to left tackle. He was playing right tackle at Oklahoma. So now you have a full year under your belt of being a left tackle. I think you'll see better, return on that investment. But it's a young group, and so there's inexperience. But if they can keep that 5 healthy, late in the season, I think they'll be clicking and they'll be one of the better offensive lines in the game. But that's been easier said than done. Injuries have been a big issue for that Cowboys offensive line for a while now.
I mean, offensive line is obviously so important for both the quarterback and for the rushing attack, and kind of like the glue to the offense in a sense. And you're right, maybe the inexperience, but also a lot of talent. So it feels like a really high ceiling, though, for that Cowboys offensive line if things do click the right way. Real quick, before we kind of do our schedule breakdown, I want to talk about Dak Prescott a little bit. He's making more money annually than any other quarterback, with his contract, 4 years, is $60 million annually. Is he the guy for Dallas, though? Do you believe he can lead this team to a Super Bowl and be that franchise quarterback for this team?
I do. I think so. I think a lot of other things around him will have to go right. And I would say number one for me in that is health. And it's not just him, it's the pieces around him. I mean, to me, I've said this several times this offseason, but I'm originally from Detroit. I was born and raised in Detroit. So outside of the Cowboys, I followed the Lions pretty closely and have all of my life. And you go into last season, I really thought the most talented rosters in the NFC were the Lions, the Niners, the Eagles, and the Cowboys. And I thought by the end of the year, the Eagles were clearly better than all of them. And I think it's funny when people just think that this is because they're more. No, they're not. They were the healthiest team. All those other 3 teams all had tons of injuries. The Eagles were rolling out in the Super Bowl. The offense they ran in week 1. If you kind of goes back to the offensive line thing. Mike McCarthy used to tell us this all the time. And after the press conference would be over, we'd have this walk off. Some stuff would be on the record, most of it off. But he would always talk about that continuity of that starting 5 offensive line. Tell me who my starting offensive line is week 1 and tell me who it is in week 17. And if it's that same group, we'll be in good shape. And that doesn't mean it has to be all first-round picks, but you need to be healthy. And so for Dak to win a Super Bowl, I think it would have to come in a season where everything fits. And that's why I thought 2 years ago it was happening, because they were relatively healthy across the board. And so that's the biggest one for me. But do I think he's on the same level as, Burrow and Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen? No, but I also think that he's in that next tier of that 5 to 10 to 12 range where you'd much rather be there than go, yeah, you know what, let's move on from him And now all of a sudden you're in this wilderness of, let's just be honest, you got to play games in the offseason with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the Steelers have been looking for a quarterback since Roethlisberger, and I don't know many people that cover this league or follow this league closely that wouldn't say that historically the Steelers are one of the best run organizations. And it doesn't take much to look over at them and be like, man, they're having a hard time finding a quarterback. They seem to always have an answer, and they don't seem to have an answer right now. It's not just the bad teams that can't find it. The good franchises can't find quarterbacks either. And so that's the problem. That's the spot you get into at quarterback. Like, yeah, maybe you don't have a guy that's top 5, but man, you certainly would rather have a guy that's 6 to 10, 6 to 12 than be constantly changing it over in the offseason and trying to hope that you find that guy. So it is interesting because he's the face of the franchise. He's the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, so he's going to get the most blame. Cowboys fans regard him as the most underrated player on the roster and the most overrated. So he's in an interesting spot, but I definitely think they're better off going with him than trying to just trade him and then start over and just try and find another quarterback.
Right. I mean, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. This is a guy who you've seen lead this team to the playoffs, lead this team to division titles, be in MVP conversations, finishing second in 2023. So, like, you've seen that there. And you mentioned an organization like Pittsburgh. For the past 3 years now, since Roethlisberger retired, they have started a different quarterback in week 1 and week 18. That's 3 straight years now. So, like, you're right. Even the best franchises struggle to find quarterbacks. And the ones that do are the ones that win Super Bowls, like the Eagles and the Chiefs these past few years. So you're 100% right there. And for all of these season previews, we do a schedule breakdown. Real quick, this just kind of, obviously we're so far away from the season, but just kind of tentatively what I have for the Dallas Cowboys. And obviously, this is a very hard schedule. A lot of people think, oh, third place schedule. No, 5th hardest schedule in the NFL based off of 2024 opponent win percentage. You face both number 1 seeds. 9 of their games come against teams who made the playoffs last year. And then you're talking about you're on opening night against the Eagles. Then you're playing on Thanksgiving against the Chiefs. You're always playing on Thanksgiving, but you have to do it against the 3-time reigning AFC champions. And then you're on the road against a really good Commanders division rival on Christmas. I mean, if there is going to be an America's team, it is the Dallas Cowboys, and that's a really tough schedule down the stretch. Overall, what stands out to you?
Yeah, it's definitely right after that bye. I mean, you get the Raiders. They should be okay against them, especially at home. But then that Eagles, Chiefs, Lions, and then really Minnesota, if J.J. McCarthy is the guy, that's a tough one too, going right into really even the Chargers and honestly, even with Washington on the road in week 17, that might be your worst weather game that you play in. So that's really the stretch. And so what that says to me when I look at their schedule is that there's just no excuse they have to start hot. Like, they won't be able to make up for it on the back end. And so it's in their best interest to, especially first-year head coach, to try and get off to a hot start. And what do you have week 1? You know, a game that, I mean, I want to say even from maybe it was the day the schedule came out up till now, Eagles have been favored by at least a touchdown in that game everywhere you look, and I don't see any reason. Now, maybe there is the whole, you know, hanging the banner ceremony celebration that they overlook. It is the first game of the season. Maybe they, you know, Dak has played pretty well throughout his career against the Eagles. Maybe they kind of surprise him there, but that's a tough game to start your season off with. But no, I have no issues with the wins and losses that you picked and the final record. Yeah, I think somewhere between 8 to 10 wins makes sense. But if they have the injuries they had last year, certainly could be a 5 to 7 win team.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you do have to get off to that hot start because it's Philadelphia, but then it's a Giants team that clearly is in a rebuilding mode, a Bears team you just don't know, and then you also have in there the Jets, the Panthers. Like, you got to start to stack up some wins there, and you got to hope. I think they will split with Philadelphia. They struggle to play in Dallas. I think you'll split with Washington. You'll most definitely should split, or if not sweep, the New York Giants. So I think you try to set yourself up well, but then it just gets really tough. I mean, that Week 9 primetime game on Monday Night Football against the Cardinals, I'm kind of circling because Arizona's coming off the bye in that game. And then you have that performance. Then you go to your bye, and then you're once again on primetime in Las Vegas. Whether the Raiders are good or not, that's still a tough environment to play in. And then 4 your final 6 games are on primetime, all against playoff teams a year ago. So that stretch, like after Week 8, is brutal, even with the bye kind of in there. So you're 100% right. I think they do need to get off to a hot start, because if not, they will not be able to compete for a real postseason position kind of in the second half. We're talking about some of the divisions here. How do you believe Dallas will fare against Philadelphia, Washington, and New York in the NFC East?
If everybody's healthy, I still think Philadelphia is just on its own tier. And then after them, I would say is where you get the Cowboys and the Commanders, and then in a third tier would be the Giants. The Commanders have the reason why I put them in the same tier as the Cowboys, whereas I think some people are probably like, well, they just went to the NFC Championship game. They should clearly be ahead of the Cowboys. I get that, but again, my time covering the Cowboys, like I'm actually looking forward to Washington playing the Cowboys, and I haven't been for most of my time covering the Cowboys. Like other than the RG3 year, I mean, it's basically been like all right, well, I got to cover this game because it's an NFC East game, but I really don't need to go to this game. It's not like there's really not a lot riding on it, and the Cowboys have generally had the upper hand. But now the Commanders are the hunted, and they haven't been the hunted in a long time. So I need to see how they respond to that. You know, that's my big thing is will they build off of that? They very certainly they could. And if they're the same team we saw last year, then by all means, then yeah, I would put them a tier above the Cowboys. I need to see that. There's just too much that went right for them and well for them, particularly late in the season, for me to think that, oh, well, just expect that now. Things change when all of a sudden you play well, and now everyone doesn't look at you as like, oh, it's Washington. We're just going to go into FedEx. We'll beat them. It's not that big of a deal. They're one of the worst run organizations in sports. They sell different ownership. Things have changed there, but still, I'm a little bit in a wait and see with Washington before I put them clearly above the Cowboys.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, now NFL defenses have had one offseason to really look at Jaden Daniels and see if they can expose him in any way. Now, it's not entirely his fault, but you look at a guy like CJ Stroud, kind of a little bit of a sophomore slump. Well, you see the same thing with Jaden Daniels. You know, I talked to a lot of people. Some people are really high on the Cowboys. Some people are really low on the Cowboys. I think you have to find a happy medium. I think that's why I have them in 9 wins. I think they could compete for a postseason position, but to me, they got to fix their running game. And you're right, there are some holes defensively on that roster as well. And if for some reason Micah Parsons isn't playing, that changes the whole equation as well. Though, as you mentioned, I don't expect that. Nonetheless, I think this team will compete for a postseason. They will compete for a playoff spot, most likely the wild card. I don't think they'll compete with Philadelphia for the division unless things really do go right. But, you know, this is a team that, you know, take away last season, they had made the playoffs 3 straight years. How do they get back there? Like, what's going to be that next step they have to take to at least return to that level, let alone get to that next point, try to make an NFC Championship game?
Yeah, I'm really beating this to death, but I mean, I just come back to health. If you tell me that George Pickens is going to be out there, CD Lamb, Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, they're going to be in pretty good shape, you know. But the big question marks for me are more on defense with DeMarvion Overshown, Trayvon Diggs coming back from their injuries. And when you have serious injuries like that, even when you come back, there's no guarantee that you're going to be all the way back and be exactly like the player you were before. So how do you overcome that, you know? And so those are some question marks that will need to be answered. But if you tell me that offense stays healthy, that offense is going to put up a lot of points, even with the question marks at the running game, because there's just too much in the passing game that other teams are going to have to worry about. That it should alone keep the Cowboys in almost every game that they're in, even against better competition, because they should be able to score points. So, yeah, if you tell me that they stay healthy, then yeah, I think they can compete for probably a wild card spot. I wouldn't pick them to win the division. But I also is one of those things where I don't think it's the end of the world if they win. Let's say they have the exact schedule, they have the exact results that you have right there, and they miss the playoffs, but they go 9-8. I don't think it's the worst thing, just because of the fact that you probably are going to get a Micah Parsons contract done. He's not going anywhere. Dak's not going anywhere. CD's not going anywhere. So now you got a full year of the offensive line playing together. Now you have a full season with Brian Schottenheimer and the new coaching staff. I know Cowboys fans don't want to hear that, but I don't think that the results you have right there would be the worst thing. I know that they want playoff wins and all that. I mean, it's been 29 years, but you also got to be realistic. So I think that schedule that you have right there with those predictions, I think that's pretty realistic.
But I guess at some point too, though, the conversation is going to become, at what point do you blow it up? I know it sounds crazy to blow it up if you have these guys signed, but at some point it's like, how long are you going to continue to field a roster that is just kind of hovering around there? When they overachieve, they're winning 11, 12 games and they're still not going anywhere in the playoffs. Just kind of to wrap this up, at what point is it just going to be over? What's the end point at this point, where, like, where's kind of the limit of where, if they don't get to a certain point by X date, they just decide to go in a different direction and blow the whole thing up?
So, I mean, in my time covering this team, I mean, Jerry Jones has been the owner the entire time. And I've covered this team during half of this Super Bowl drought. And I can tell you this and I feel pretty confident saying this, there won't be any major changes anytime soon. I think that this core that they have right now, George Pickens probably won't be part of that because he'll go to free agency. And I don't see them spending big on 2 receivers. So if he has a big year, he probably is leaving. But when I talk about the core, I mean like Dak, CD, Micah.
Sure.
At least 3 more years. And I think that lines up with how many years that Jerry's going to give Brian Schottenheimer. I don't see this just being a 1-year thing. I think Jerry gives Schottenheimer a few years. Dak's got a few years left on his contract. Same with CD. And so I think that's where you push it into. I don't think that they do some massive turnaround change to anything in these next 3 years. The only way that would potentially happen, and the only reason I'm saying it is because it is the Cowboys, would be if Dak was to go down and then Joe Milton stepped in and was just incredible. And the only reason why I say that is because that's kind of how Tony Romo got the job. That's how Dak got the job. And Dak was 4th round pick. Tony Romo was undrafted. Joe Milton is not a guy that anyone who's sitting here today is expecting to be the Cowboys franchise quarterback in the next 3-4 years. But yeah, if something crazy like that happened, then yeah, maybe that would change the trajectory. But I just think with Jerry having this money invested in Dak and CD, and then probably within the next month in Micah, he's not going to want to blow anything up. As much as I think that he would love to win a Super Bowl, I think it terrifies him to be that team that it was in the early 2000s, where you got 3 consecutive seasons of 5 wins. And so I think that's why you also keep going in this direction, because that's if Jerry didn't think that way, I don't think he hires Brian Schottenheimer. I think he, at the very least, I think he interviews Ben Johnson. He tries to go for, like, let me at least interview all these top other candidates before, and he didn't do that, And so because of that, I think that this window right now is at least the next 2 to 3 years.
Jon Machota, thank you so much for coming on the show today to help us preview the Dallas Cowboys season. I know a lot of fans want to think that it is the year, though there are a lot of question marks, and we're excited to see how everything does work in with Dallas football. And obviously, you're one of the biggest reporters. If you're a Dallas Cowboys fan watching this, I'm sure you've seen Jon's work. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. It means a lot.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on. It was a good time.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap this one up here. Again, we are previewing each NFL team season before the season does start. Today was the Dallas Cowboys, with many more to come here on Chase's Sports News. Don't go anywhere. I'm your host, Chase Coburn from Chase's Sports News.